This is the fusion of two cultures. My name is Roger Griffin. I'm a deacon in the Diocese of the Southwest, originally ordained in the Diocese of South Carolina. I'm also the Dean of Mexico, all of Mexico.
Wow.
And also, obviously, a SAMS missionary and an instructor for a group called More College Latin America. And I will show you this one. This painting, if you can see, it's also called The Fusion of Two Cultures. And I love this painting. It's hanging on the wall in my office. And it's there as a reminder. Because you see, when many years ago, when Joanne and I first went to Mexico as missionaries, I thought, like most North Americans, that I knew plenty about Mexico. You know, tacos, sombreros, Cinco de Mayo. And in my youthful zeal, I didn't really appreciate how we could possibly need 9 whole months of language and cultural training before getting to work on the mission field. But after a little while in Mexico City, living and ministering, I began to realize that the differences between our cultures go a lot deeper than just language or cuisine. You know, and that those of us ministering and wishing to minister to our Hispanic neighbors really should understand better and have an appreciation for. So it's with this in mind that the first part of our time together will be a very brief Mexican history and cultural lesson. And then the second part will be, we'll take some time to talk about application and strategy and whatever else you want to talk about. So we don't have a lot of time, so let's get started. Nobody really knows where they came from. All we do know is they wandered down from the north, probably the American Northwest, unruly mercenaries, uncivilized Spartans, and looked for and searched for a homeland. By the year 1250, they had wandered into the Valley of Mexico, onto the shores of Lake Texcoco, the current site of Mexico City. Well, it wasn't long before their neighbors grew outraged at their abusive behavior and banished them to a small mud island in the middle of Lake Texcoco. Knowing that all there was on this island were cactus and rattlesnakes, the tribal leaders were pretty sure that they had seen the last of these unruly Spartans. But much to their surprise, a few years later, they found that these tenacious warriors were actually thriving on a diet of, you guessed it, cactus and rattlesnakes. They did so well, in fact, by the time Christopher Columbus arrived in the New World in 1492, they had conquered the complete section of central Mexico. These were the mighty Aztecs, or the Mexica, as they called themselves. They had built a magnificent city on their little mud island, magnificent palaces and temples, waterways, aqueducts. They had crisscrossed their empire with highways. They were regularly doing trade with peoples as far north as the American Northwest and as far south as the Incas in Peru. So now, while this was going on in Mexico, back in Northern Europe, the people there are experiencing what? They're in the middle of the Renaissance, and the Reformation is beginning to rumble. There's a real spirit of optimism in the air. The culture, commerce, the arts are all beginning to flourish. But in Spain, in the Iberian Peninsula, the people are experiencing a different type of Renaissance there. There they have just completed 700 years of crusades and reconquest, finally defeating the last of the Moorish strongholds, Granada, and placing Spain once again, finally, united under the crown and fully submitted to the Holy See of Rome. And they were also deeply committed to the Inquisition, converting at the point of a sword, expelling or otherwise eliminating all non-Catholics from their land.
No speakable content.
And it was into this cruel and medieval culture that news began to trickle back from the New World. Stories of fame and fortune, stories of conquest and adventure, fountains of youth, and cities of gold. And these stories found a very welcome home in the ears of a young Hernan Cortez, who at the age of 18 left Spain and sailed to what is now the Dominican Republic, where he quickly began to build his career and his fame. Meantime, let's go back to Mexico. The Mexican king or emperor, Moctezuma, is beginning to hear reports from the coastline, reports of floating houses, bringing hundreds of strange-looking men across the ocean to their shore. Men with shiny bodies, white faces, and beards. and amazing animals they'd never seen before. Animals, some even looked to be half animal and half human, with the 4 legs on the bottom and the torso of one of these shiny men on top. These reports deeply troubled Moctezuma, because you see, in Aztec prophecy, it spoke of an ancient god, Quetzalcoatl, who is described as having a shiny body, a white face, and a beard. And according to their calendar, Quetzalcoatl was due to return to Mexico any time now to reclaim his kingdom, which was rightfully his. So Moctezuma was indecisive. He didn't know whether to attack these foreigners as invaders or to welcome them as gods. So while he was indecisive, Cortez and his 400 men were quite decisive, quickly conquering several of the local tribes and making allies of many, many more, quickly building a fighting force of 200,000 to 300,000 on their march to Mexico City. And it was in the year of 1519 that they arrived at the top of a mountain pass several miles to the east of Mexico City. From this vantage point, they could look down and see the magnificent city in the middle of the lake. And they had never seen such a sight before. It is said that at that time, the Mexico City's population was greater than that of Rome or of Paris, that it was as well-ordered and as beautiful as any city in all of Europe. In fact, Bernal Diaz, one of Cortez's men, wrote in his diary saying, it was like we were in a dream. We could not imagine what we were looking at, and it was just so amazing. And spurred on by the sight, they quickly pushed their agenda. Bernal Diaz again writes in his diary, "We came to serve God and get rich, as all men wish to do." And so there it was, laid out before them in all its magnificence and all its glory. Tenochtitlan, Mexico City, the veritable El Dorado, if you will.
Yeah.
So by 1521, the brutal and powerful Aztec kingdom had been overthrown by the brutal and powerful Spanish conquistadors, who quickly began to build their new Spain on the ruins of the once great Aztec Mexica Empire. Now keep in mind, this is 1521, 100 years before our forefathers landed at Pilgrim Rock in 1620. In fact, by that time, by 1620, Spain was well established throughout Latin America. In fact, the city Joanne and I live in, Aguascalientes, Mexico, was established in 1575. So let's take a moment and kind of compare what we've just heard with our own history. We basically know that our forefathers came to the New World with their wives, with their children. They came as families in hopes of finding opportunity to build a new life, free from tyranny and oppression. The conquistadors, on the other hand, having been trained by 700 years of conquest and adventure and crusades, were very hungry for more. They came to conquer land for Spain, souls for Rome, to grab the gold and return home, become rich gentlemen and retire. So, and again, as our forefathers, they brought with them the Renaissance and the Reformation. The Spaniards brought with them to the New World a medieval religion, 700 years of bloody war, and the Inquisition. And so, and that conquest, that fusion of two cultures is still felt very deeply today. Joel Morales Cruz writes in his book, The Mexican Reformation, when the Reformation won peoples and kingdoms for what would be called Protestantism, Spain would see itself as especially chosen by God to preserve the Catholic faith in Europe and to spread it to the millions of people recently discovered across the Atlantic. The lessons learned through centuries of warfare would be used to establish Catholicism at the point of a sword in these Americas to fulfill Spain's own particular brand of manifest destiny. So this was their manifest destiny, sanctioned by Rome, who supplied the indulgences to cover their many transgressions of war. They saw themselves as holy crusaders with all rights to the spoils of conquest. They conquered militarily, they conquered religiously, and they conquered sexually as well. Cruz also writes, Mexican children learned from an early age that their history was born out of an act of violence of cosmic proportions in which our Spanish forefathers raped, our Indian foremothers. And the ruins of pre-Columbian cities and towns stand in silent testimony to that catastrophe. The authoritarian and violent nature of Spanish rule and the imposition of Catholicism led to an aversion to the distant and powerful God, and drew Mexicans to the maternal Virgin of Guadalupe, and also to a suffering Christ. So Mexicans also often refer to themselves as Guadalupanas. Mm-hmm. They pay homage to Maria Guadalupe, the patron mother of Mexico, their indulgent mother, and to a suffering Christ. Typically, Catholic churches in Mexico are full on Good Friday and empty on Resurrection Sunday. But there is more to Mexico than just this. In spite of their tumultuous history, Mexico is a very lively and vibrant culture. It is a rich mixture of American Indian, of Spanish and Moorish. There are 64 distinct languages spoken in Mexico, with over 200 dialects at this time. Throughout Mexico, you can find magnificent cathedrals, palaces, and universities, some dating back to the 1500s. You will also find ancient pagan temples and pyramids, some more than 2,000 years old. Mexico is also home to 34 UNESCO World Heritage Sites, including the colonial villages, cities of Guanajuato and San Miguel de Allende. Mexicans love their country. They're very patriotic, yes, but not to a government or to a political party necessarily, but to the land. The land belongs to them, and they belong to the land. Mexicans value relationship. They value status and position in their community and in their families. They value living life. Having lunch with friends or having dinner with family is more important than finishing a job on time. And Mexico is changing. As I said, Mexicans often refer to themselves as Guadalupanas, paying homage to Maria Guadalupe, la patrona de Mexico. But the truth is, the fact is that this is really much more a patriotic and cultural meme than a spiritual reality. By and large, young people in Latin America, and young Latins here as well, see less and less value in the Catholic Church or in attending Mass. They're not angry or bitter or anything, they just don't see the point. And they're hungry. They're hungry for something the Catholic Church has not provided for them. Justo Gonzalez in his book, Mañana, writes, among Hispanics there is a growing tendency towards radical secularization. This is not due to the difficulties with which theologians often deal, but rather to the difficulty that the gospel of love is not translated into actual good news. Okay, so how do we reach across this cultural chasm and minister to our Hispanic neighbors? Well, in my view, number one, just as we're doing here, we make the effort to learn something more about their history, about their culture, and to appreciate where they're coming from. And number two, we take an honest look at ourselves and our own assumptions as we attempt to minister. D.J. Schwetz, in his book Reciprocal Missions, writes, an assumption that typically comes up that we should address goes something like this. Someone will say, oh, they're so happy, even though they have so little. And I've heard this. And he writes, I challenge this assumption by asking, do we know these people well enough to understand if they are truly happy with what they have, or are we making an assumption based on a brief interaction with them? And indeed, are we really seeing things the way they are, or do we sometimes tend to make convenient conclusions based on our assumptions? It's a good question. You know, G.K. Chesterton famously wrote, the tourist sees what he comes to see. The traveler sees what he sees. So it's my personal experience, and Joanne's as well, that yes, young people in Mexico and Latin America and those that come north, they're open, they're hungry, they're asking questions, and they're looking for meaning and purpose. It is hard sometimes to get behind the smile, because they're very friendly people, but it's sometimes hard to earn that trust and to build those relationships. But we will find, I believe, that as we make the effort to understand better and to know more about their culture and where they're coming from and appreciate that and honor it in our relationship building, that we will find that they are much more open than we first thought. So in conclusion, Yes, in conclusion, I hope that I've given you a tidbit or two about Mexican and Latin culture that perhaps you didn't know before. But more than anything, I hope you'll be a little bit inspired to read and learn some more and apply that. Thank you very much. Now, before we go into question and answer, this is the exam. I want to take just a moment. I would love it if everybody would do this, but I won't ask everyone. I'll ask if you would like. I do have the slides here, but really what you probably want is a transcript of what you just heard with footnotes. If you would like a copy of that, or if you would like to know more about what we're doing in Mexico, our ministry in Mexico, please take the card, write your name and your email address on that if we don't have it already. And let's take 20 or 30 seconds and do that right now, and we'll go on, move on. Okay, I think we're pretty much there. If I can ask my lovely assistant if you pick those up, and hold them up. And
She's looking behind.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
So, questions or comments about what you just heard?
I have a question.
Yes, ma'am.
What was the first misconception that you had about the culture as you went in as a missionary?
And when we first went into Mexico
Uh-huh.
City? My first impression.
Misconception.
Oh, misconceptions. Oh, thank you. Well,
Something that you went in thinking and then you realized
Right.
that you were all wrong.
oh,
After
well,
months and months
pretty
of
much
being
all
there.
of it. But yeah, just as I touched on in the beginning, it's kind of having this naive notion that, because as an American, and I think we all kind of tend to do this, I know I certainly did, we tend to think that, well, the world is like us, or they want to be like us, okay? And so went in kind of not arrogantly. I mean, we're good people. We want to help. We want to minister. We want to do things and fix things, but it's just our, what's important to us is the watch, okay? And what's important to Latinos is the relationship. And so, frankly, that's something that we're still getting, we're getting reacclimated and getting acclimated to, and remembering that, because, I tend to want to get to bed by 9:30 or 10 o'clock and get up at 6 o'clock in the morning. Well, our Mexican friends, they like to stay up and talk till midnight, right?
And pull out the cereal bowls and start over.
Right. And so, probably, one misconception that we had that was kind of, it took a little while to understand, was understanding that the Catholic Church here is a very different Catholic Church than it is in Latin America. And not really understanding that when we first went. And so.
Is it more legalistic over there, you think?
Yeah, indeed.
Yeah.
It's kind of, yeah, and not just the Catholic Church, but other
Yeah.
non-denominational and Protestant churches as
Like
well. Can be very,
old-fashioned.
it's kind of that cultural, deal there. Yes, sir.
Well, that was the question. Certainly my impression was that Mexico's a religious country, that Mexicans are religious. You see the people going into the cathedral, and so on. So why go if you have a religious country?
Thank you very much. That's a very good question, because I think that's a conception that a lot of North Americans have. And yet, Mexico technically is like 85% Catholic. but that's not necessarily Christian. As I said, particularly with the young people, you know, their religion is more of a cultural and patriotic understanding. And you know, it's kind of funny talking with people there, because here we understand that Catholics can also be Christians. We understand that Anglicans sometimes are not Christians, you know. But Catholics here can be Christian. There, that's not the case. There, you're either Catholic or you're Christian.
Right.
Yes.
Yes,
Right.
that is actually
Very, you know, very clear.
surprising.
And unfortunately, their concept of Protestant Christianity, like the sister said, can be very legalistic understanding of that, which, you know, is another whole subject. But yes, and just as we were in the talk, we were talking about how, you know, our culture, our understanding of religion and Christianity came out of the Renaissance, came out of the Reformation. And, you know, and our forefathers came as families. And, you know, not to say that we're perfect or that that's better, I'm just explaining what was and what is. Whereas, you know, their culture really was very medieval. And their understanding of Christianity, their understanding of Catholicism is a very medieval church, not a Reformed church, not a church that has been impacted by the Reform. Okay? Other questions? Yes, sir.
How much influence do the drug gangs and the cartels and the narco-traficantes and all that have on the culture?
Well, you know, it's a problem. You know, I mean, as far as influencing the culture, you know, it's just a problem. You know, it's not like everybody wants to run out and be drug dealers. You know, but it's you know, it's a problem. Yeah.
Can I speak a
Sure,
little bit to
absolutely.
that? One of the Anglican Church in North America, one of the churches just 2 hours north from where we live, it touches every life. It's touched the life of the pastor there. His wife and daughters had their vehicle robbed right in front of their house at gunpoint. Another co-pastor at one time, he and his wife and son were kidnapped and sequestered and forced to sell their business and handed over. These are people who, like you hear in other countries of the world, they're living under the difficulty and the anarchy of might is right, and whoever's got the power is who has the power. And to stand as a Christian and to still thrive and flourish in your culture. Yes, the drug culture is everywhere, and people are looking, and it's in some places in Central America. Perhaps you've read about it. Some of the drug cultures realize that Christ is having an impact on certain people, and when they want to leave the gang, the drug lords make sure that they are going to church.
Yeah.
So it's almost a forced conversion in another direction, but we give thanks to God. But it touches every life. But here in the United States, we have things that we might not notice that they do about our culture that touches every life and that influences the church. And so we have to live with those certain realities that we're blind to our own culture where, you know, fish don't know they're wet. So
Right.
in some ways, it's easy for us to see that culture in it. And even, right, one of the pastors where we are in Aguascalientes in Mexico City, she was kidnapped and her car robbed at gunpoint. But they were very kind to her. And it's just one of those things that you accept that, you know, there's chaos. And it's not to be wished for, because this is what it leaves it to, the people who are powerful. And so you have Christians that, you know, actively need to know that the name of Jesus is the name above all names. But it does make for a you watch your back.
Yes, ma'am.
I have a comment because I am Latin American. I'm from Colombia, South America. And it's great that you pointed that we need to know the culture. Because most of the people in the United States think that because it's Mexico, all the Latin American people are Mexican.
Yeah.
And
Yeah,
we
very
are
good
not.
point.
So it is good to know what is the history behind all the
Yes,
cultures.
indeed.
And my question is, because I have been, it is even for me a new culture, Mexico. So it is how do you deal with the Guadalupano thing. breaking that into a Christian
Yeah,
living life?
yeah.
How do you?
It's a tough question. I mean, our attitude basically, because a lot of, and Maria Guadalupe is another whole subject that we could spend another hour on. You know, just the background and the history and where that whole cult came from in Mexico. You know, our basic attitude is you know, when we run it, because we have an Uber ministry, you know, we ride Uber pretty much everywhere because we don't have a car yet. Right? So we get in conversations with the Uber drivers, and they'll ask why we're there, and we say, well, we're Anglicans, and we're here working with the church. Oh, what's Anglican? And you know, so here we go. And I'll always ask, you know, are you Catholic? And you know, they'll say, yeah. And at least in Aguascalientes, you know, everyone that we run into is very respectful of our differences. And we also express, you know, respect for them and for Maria Guadalupe, but we understand it as a cultural thing. And really, by and large, they do too. Even the Protestants, though they won't, you know, pay homage to her like a Catholic, will acknowledge that Maria Guadalupe is an influence in the country. It's a cultural influence in the culture. And I think that's true. I mean, it's you know, I mean, we have Santa Claus, we have Uncle Sam.
Right.
You know, we have, you know,
Uncle Sam.
we have a lot of these images and these cultural icons, you know, that we, you know, that we recognize, and though we know that there is no spiritual significance, you know, we understand, you know, we just recognize them as a patriotic or cultural means. Yeah, yes, ma'am.
Kind of along the same vein, how do Anglicans and maybe evangelicals who are widely deal with the Day of the Dead and those practices?
Yeah, we try to avoid it. You know, the Day of the Dead is like, I mean, it's a pagan religious holiday. You know, it has a pagan aspect. It has, you know, Roman Catholic aspect as well. But and again, it's very much like here with Halloween. It has become so commercialized. You know, when we were in Mexico City before, yeah, Day of the Dead, you know, the families would go out to the grave sites, you know, and some would party and some would, you know, it was just, I mean, Mexican Latinos love opportunities to party. Yeah.
One more.
One more opportunity. Yeah.
And talking about that is, I think it's lack of knowledge. Because a lot of people celebrate those things without knowing that they are celebrating their own thing.
That's tradition.
And so I think in Latin America, and it's not just Mexico, all Latin America we do follow the fun, follow the party.
Right.
And so we don't understand. And sometimes we celebrate things that we don't even know what it is.
But we celebrate.
And by and large, the Christians there, the non-Catholics there, do not involve themselves in Day of the Dead.
Some of the Mexicans I talked to said that it's just really a way to remember your family members.
Well,
And
you know, there
they
is
look
that
at-
aspect to it, and that, you know, right, and there, yeah, and we can appreciate that, but it's really más allá. You know, it's just really something much, you know, it's spiritualizing the whole. We're not just remembering our forefathers, you know, we're worshiping them. You know, we're praying for them in purgatory. We're, you know, if we forget them, then they die. You know, and you've probably seen that movie Coco. You know, which is a very very cute, stylized. You know, but there are some cultural aspects in there that ring very true as well. In that, yes, ma'am.
Do you feel like, I mean, when I was there, I just sort of got the feeling that, like, Maria Guadalupe, Day of the Dead, Magic Villages, all of those kinds of things that are just end up being like superstitions that influence the way people think, and they don't really think about it being part of a religion. It's just part of their culture, but it's
with a lot of people that's very true. With a lot of people that's true, particularly when you get into southern Mexico and the poor classes of people.
And even Catholicism. I mean, like the drug lords make people go to church. It's because they're afraid if they don't that something.
And that's what I was referring to in the medieval, you know, understanding of Catholicism. It's very much a legalistic. We're in control. If you don't come to us, you need to be afraid. If you don't come and confess and have celebrate the mass, or you're going to die and go to purgatory, and everybody's going to forget you, and you're going to die in hell. Right. So.
Something that we found, though, let's just say among some of the middle class and the people who have a little more means, I've noted in Aguascalientes that the Catholic Church is full. There's families going there. But these are the rich people. The rich people do go to church, And they're looking for answers, and the people that we've interacted with, a friend of mine, and she's fairly well off, but her mother just recently died. And so she has a lot of questions about that, because people are telling her, oh, you need to pray to the Virgin, and oh, you need to do this, and oh, you need to light candles, and you need to have these vigils, or
And all the
her souls,
rosaries.
I mean, and they're almost hyper-religious, keepers of the faith, if you will, because they see themselves as, the benefactors of the people around them. And she was like, and she's Catholic, and she said, show it to me in the Bible. And I thought, well, now that's the most educated answer I've heard.
Yeah.
But this is
Which
a
is
different
one
class of people as well. But she has real questions about, where is my mother right now? And do I need to be doing these things? And so we're having this ongoing
So
conversation.
that's a very interesting point, because we find also that Catholics, even though they don't know the Bible, they respect the Bible.
Yes.
Yes.
And so now we have not done that yet, but we're hoping when we get back to start in earnest, with the Bible study. But others have told us that very often that Catholics, though they won't come to your church, they may come, meet you at a coffee shop, or may come to your house, and just to talk about the Bible, which is a very, definitely an inroad, definitely, absolutely. Yes, ma'am.
Oh, no.
Oh, okay.
I have another point. This is an answer of you, because if they are religious, but they don't have Jesus as a
Yeah.
relationship.
Right.
Right.
And it's needed. It's
That's
needed.
what's missing.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and it's needed in the way of love and knowing the position, because they have been treated like that.
Yeah.
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 And they need to realize that he's a God of friend and Father, and they can sit in the lap instead of a father of judgment.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The distant, cold father.
Yeah.
And like you said,
Judgmental.
And as you said, the indulgent mother, she's, she's your intermediary between you and Papa, who's,
Yeah.
Yes.
he's off busy doing things,
Well,
don't bother
we're
him.
about to run out of
Yeah.
time, so give you a couple of things here. One, I don't know if your church is actively wanting to reach out, to the Hispanics in your community. A couple of things is honor, their holidays. Okay, and I'll put you in. Cinco de Mayo is just not that big a deal. Cinco de Mayo is when the Mexicans defeated the French in Puebla. Who hasn't defeated the French? Okay, so it's just not that big a deal. But some dates that are. Ash Wednesday and Lent, are very important, like I said in the talk, and use that as you will. Holy Week, which is usually a vacation week for a lot of people in Mexico. September 16th is their Independence Day, and Padre Hidalgo and the Cry of Dolores. November 1st and 2nd, as we touched on, the Day of the Dead. And probably the most important day in Mexico is December 12th. And do with this as you will, but this is Maria Guadalupe Day. And so, and I'm not going to judge anybody. You can use those dates as you best see fit. And one thing that we have found that is very effective are English classes. And I encourage everyone. It's not hard. You don't have to know how to speak Spanish to have an English as a second language class. And I promise you, somewhere in your community, someone is offering English classes to Hispanics. Go and volunteer and learn how it's done, and then take it back to your church, and offer it. This is, because it's useful, it's helpful, and if they want to advance, as many of them do, they understand that English is very important for them to learn. And it's a good way to build relationships, invite them to church, and get to know them. What else?
Wait, you got a hand up.
Yes.
I just wanted to offer another suggestion that we have discovered is we opened a tutoring center, and you could just do it at your church
Yeah.
or whatever, because the children of, the Latinos that, the parents speak Spanish and the children speak English, they have a deficiency in all the areas of language arts and things like that,
Yeah.
so they always need tutoring. Even if there's programs in the school, they just need more tutoring, and then you have one-on-one contact with them. in the
And
parents.
Latin mothers in the United States do not speak English very much.
Right.
Their husbands go out to work, The
Yeah.
kids
Right,
go to
right.
school,
Yep.
and I've met them, they've been 5, 7 years in the United States, they don't speak a lick, not hardly any words in English.
Yep.
And I'm asking them why, they go, I never leave the house, they're scared to
Yeah.
leave the
Yeah.
house. If you want to reach out to Latin women, you go to the laundromat, because that's where they all are.
And because they only speak Spanish in the home, and then they
Right.
have to learn English, I mean, like in writing, in speaking, and all those classes, literature, they, you know,
Right.
for the most part, have a deficiency in these.
Okay, I think we have maybe time for one more question. If there is one, if there's not, we'll go ahead and close it
I
out.
just want to say thank you very much for the brief history lesson. I'm climbing up the hill to Ivy.
All right, thank you. Okay, thank you, folks. Lord bless.
Thank you.